Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for those who've been here quite a long time. It says from my notes, this is session 18, which sounds like a lot. So clearly a great deal has been going on at the conference. I'm Richard Corns, Chief Executive of the British Council for Offices, and I'm delighted and honoured to be your chairman for this session this afternoon. And my thanks to Anthony Wood and all at the Council for very kindly inviting me. I'm delighted to have three expert panelists with me this afternoon to entertain and inform, I hope. On my immediate right is Talal Al-Malmain, and Talal is Chief Executive and Chairman of the Kingdom Real Estate Development Company. He's an engineer by training and also holds an MBA from the University of Liverpool, and will be talking to us about tall buildings from the perspective of the Middle East. In the middle is Bill Baker, and Bill is Structural Engineering Partner for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, SOM, and the holder of many awards, including one from the CTBUH, and widely known and regarded for his work on super tall buildings. And Bill will examine tall buildings from a US perspective. And on the far right is Stefan Defay, and Stefan is Deputy Managing Director of EPADESA, and this is a public development authority managing regeneration of a large area of Paris, including the La Défense district, and Stefan will give us a European perspective. Now, the structure of this session is to be as interactive as we can possibly make it, which means lots of questions from you. And when we come to that point after our various 5-minute presentations, now a few thoughts to kick off. And I'm not doing very well with my slides because that's me. But we've done that bit. And now we come to this. Tall is relative. We've got four very famous images here, of course. The pyramids, St. Paul's Cathedral, Wren's masterpiece, very close to here. There seen from the Blitz and the Second World War, the Eiffel Tower and Taipei 101. I mean, I put these up for no reason other to try and sort of make this point of the relative context of them all. The pyramids obviously dominant in their time and still very significant. St. Paul's dominated the skyline for many years and was particularly stark with the Blitz. The Eiffel Tower, of course, hugely controversial. And Taipei 101, I remember when I went to the top of that building when it was still the tallest a few years ago now, and was struck by how it completely dominated the skyline, and there was very little else around that was actually very tall. So tall is relative, I think. And what are the characteristics leading on from that which make a tall building part of the heritage? Well, that's what we're going to try and explore in an hour or so this afternoon. And who knows, really? And how can one define a tall building? Who are the arbiters of good taste who make this decision as to what is a good tall building and what is one that is perhaps less so? And perhaps who better to turn to for wisdom on this than one of the starchitects at the moment, Renzo Piano, the designer, of course, of the Shard, Europe's tallest building and a feature of this conference, I know. And in a revealing article in the Financial Times earlier this month, Mr. Piano suggested that, and I quote, "The star architect system has been very bad. It has been pushing architecture towards being seen as fashion. Fashion is celebrating the moment." He went on to say that architecture needs a longer view, and this bit I particularly liked. To judge a building's worth requires time, or as he put it rather enigmatically, I think, architecture is a bit like a river, like a forest, like cities. It's a long thing. Well, talking of long things, he also once said that skyscrapers are aggressive phallic fortresses. That was before he built the Shard, designed the Shard, of course. So make of that what you will. Anyway, the future. Is this the future? I'm indebted to Glen House, one of our members. I've pinched this slide from him. We had our own conference in Madrid a few weeks ago, and Glen used this this slide, which he took from the internet, for 4 buildings, which I wonder if anyone here has connections with. These are theoretical buildings, but perhaps they'll be built one way. But is this the future? I don't know. Perhaps not in my opinion, but I'm not an expert on these matters. But here is a tall building I do like very much, which is part of the heritage. Again, used this slide by Simon Allford, another BCO member, at our conference the other week. Mies van der Rohe's masterpiece in Manhattan, the Seagram building, to me just sublime and immediately part of the heritage, and not least because of this, perhaps the nicest place to eat anywhere on the planet. The Four Seasons restaurant, there's the pool room, also the grill room, of course, next door, the power eating center for New York, and absolutely wonderful in every respect. That is a building that in all kinds of ways has become part of the heritage in my view. But anyway, that is enough from me by way of introduction and a bit of scene setting, and I will now pass on immediately to an expert, and that is Talal, who is going to give us the Middle East perspective, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. When I was asked to be part of the panel to talk about height and heritage, or as heritage, I kind of had a problem with that. I didn't know how to relate heritage to the height. So the first thing that came to mind was the historical monuments and the mosques in the Middle East. And clearly, some of them are, the first one is like in the middle of the holiest city in Saudi Arabia. It's in Mecca. And one in Istanbul, the Blue Mosque, and Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara. It's just, it seems that the height of the minarets had taken a center of attention of this whole great architecture. So, and of course, from centuries away, there's the pyramids and the Madan Saleh in the northwest of Saudi Arabia. When you look at these pictures, it seems to me that the most important in them is people had built them for a reason. And it seems like it's just branding somehow a location of a country, or a location of a city within a country. But we have noticed also, due to the lack of understanding of the complexity of building such tall buildings, the regulators have been really a big burden on the developer side. So we had to establish a common interest between us and the regulators. And in order to do that, I thought, and to make them also a stakeholder in building tall buildings, we had to have something in common. And that is a pride that is associated with what you do, with how tall you are, or, I'm sorry, I'm only 5'7", I think, but nevertheless. It's very important to get the regulators on board before starting the building, because this costs a lot of money. It took us exactly 7 years to get an approval. And this approval is pending a renewal every year. And I wonder if this Congress at one stage would be involved at the level of approvals all over the world, due to the amount of knowledge available in this room and all the other rooms through this conference. So the Middle East have always talked about honor, righteousness, generosity, fidelity, and respect and pride. And we wanted to emphasize these through building the building in everything. When you promise a space that is safe and that is durable and that is, even when it comes to cost, it's very important to keep in mind that without these, you'll always do a half job. Of course, persistence, resolve, insistence, determination, and endurance is parts of the character and the DNA of the builders or all the team that is involved in building such high buildings. And I'm sure you have known and you've heard about Kingdom Center being built in Jeddah that will surpass the 1,000 meter height. And just to jumpstart, please do not ask me what the plus is for, just in case. And we really need to, building 1,000 or above 1,000 was very important to us, because 1,000 seems to be a mark where people have to surpass, to go beyond. Of course, once Pride is established as a common objective with the country officials, then the actual journey has started. The height, in terms of height, King Tower will be the highest building in the world. It will be the highest freestanding structure, and it will be the highest number of floors. Anyway, I think you can read the rest of it, but
big.
Yeah, but I love this the most. It's by Julia Child, when she said, being tall is an advantage, especially in business. People will always remember you. And if you are in the crowd, you'll always have some clean air to breathe. So I leave it at that and wait for your interesting questions that I might not be able to answer to half of them.
Excellent.
With you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Talal. Excellent. Thank you. Bill.
Anyway, it was interesting, I'm one of the trustees of the council, and as we were putting together this conference, Anthony's proposed the title of, as you see here, height and heritage. And then here we are in a session about height as heritage. And he asked me to look at this topic from a U.S. perspective, okay? And here's an image. It needs no caption. It's New York. It's also the Empire State Building. It's both. And so in the United States, we've had very tall buildings since the 1920s. And not every city, but certain cities. And certainly, you take this image, you know where it is, and you know what it speaks of. And it has all this very layered information in one image that's centered about this tall building. And you can do the same thing for other cities. Certainly, does not need a caption. It's Chicago. The Willis Tower. They keep changing the names of my buildings. So I get, anyway, but it's the Willis Tower, and certainly it becomes the marker in the place that tells you where you are, and becomes part of it. Same thing for San Francisco, even though it kind of competes a bit with the Golden Gate Bridge as the imagery of the city, but here the Transamerica Tower is part of it. Now, this isn't true of all cities in the U.S., but certainly the denser cities, the ones that do have this tradition, the buildings do become the heritage and the markers, and we're starting to see things that you wouldn't have expected in a very practical America. They were several years ago. There was a proposal to put a new base around the bottom of the Hancock. And the public was outraged. The little men and women in tennis shoes came in with their posters, and to protect the Big John from the onslaught of like it says there, don't put a skirt on Big John. It was so it became this whole thing. And the image in the middle there is kind of interesting. This about 10 years ago, the U.S. Mint decided to issue a bunch of quarters, 25-cent pieces. And on the reverse, on the head side is I think George Washington. On the tails would be images of all the states. And for Illinois, the images there's two recognizable images there: Abraham Lincoln and the John Hancock Tower. So it becomes very much the identity of the whole thing. Now, it is interesting about, we talked a lot in the earlier sessions today about heritage and listed buildings and the like. We don't have that same, the British listing is certainly very advanced compared to most places. But it's interesting that there are buildings that become issues and that aren't listed that want to be protected. Now, this is a building by Bertram Goldberg, who's the one who did those corn cobs on the river in Chicago, the famous Marina Towers. He did this hospital, Prentice Hospital, and it was interesting because it was done for an institution, okay, And it kind of became obsolete, all right? It was a hospital. They wanted a research facility, so how they deal with the space. It's a very, I wouldn't say it's a beautiful building, but it's a very important building. And so it became, a great deal of controversy in Chicago where people were trying to protect it. And what is kind of interesting from this is, when you think about tall buildings and heritage, is if you're an institution like Northwestern University in this case, you just wonder if they're going to go out and hire a landmark architect again. Because in 50 years from now, when they want to replace whatever you're going to build today with something new, are they going to do it again? They're going to have another battle. Are they better served by mediocre background buildings? And it's kind of a scary thought, from a quality of design point of view that it may inhibit some of the things. Another interesting point is tall buildings are somewhat protected by their size. The cost of demolishing, like the Empire State Building or the Sears Tower, Willis Tower, is enormous. Okay. And so it makes us think, do we as designers or regulators or institutions who are important to the city think about future-proofing of your buildings? I mean, if you're building things that are so big that you're probably not going to take them down, and they're going to be around just because they're sure the economy of not having them around is so big, what do we think about in the future? Is it possible to future-proof these things? Clearly a lot of the tall buildings in Chicago, the old buildings are now all residential. They've gone from, because it became A-class office to B to C till you can't market it anymore as office space and it becomes residential. And I'll be curious to see how this goes in the future. Okay, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Bill. Stefan.
Thank you very much. Tagar introduced the word pride. William, the word identity. I think that two notions are very important with the subject of the link between height and heritage. And if I take from an European perspective, or at least a French perspective with the example of Paris, but it can be done with other cities, these two notions are very, very important. As a urban regulator, a public authority, something that is very important to us is the identity of the city that is created by the accumulation of individual buildings. Here you have one of the most famous high-rise in the world, perhaps, Eiffel Tower. And something that is very interesting with the Eiffel Tower is that exactly like a New York image, you immediately recognize Paris. And this is even a value. Somebody has tried to evaluate the value of the Eiffel Tower. I have no idea the way it has been evaluated. I don't know if the figure is good or wrong, but that's something that is a reality. And at some point, when a high-rise, when in general a building, become really such an heritage that it became an identity building, this value becomes to be reality. Well, Paris, if you know this city, it's precisely a non-tall city, with the opposite of the American cities. A non-tall city, and always in the history of Paris, yesterday but today also, there has been a dilemma between hate and a peaceful urbanism. And the way this dilemma has been resolved in Paris, except with the Eiffel Tower, has been to create La Défense. La Défense, historically, it's quite interesting. The buildings that create La Défense has been driven by two elements. First of all, the need for landmarks. When you want to create something in the middle of nowhere, here in this area, were slums in late 50s. When you want to create in the middle of nowhere, you have the need for landmarks. Well, the first landmark of La Défense is not a tall one, it's the CNIT that is here, a very beautiful building and very interesting in a technical point of view. But the second driver of La Défense has been something that I call Americanism. Parisians wanted to do like America, to make a small New York, a small Manhattan in Paris. And this has been a driver. And something that's very interesting between high-rises is the competition that exists, but it's a good competition, a way to drive everybody toward better quality. Well, the problem when you have an area like La Défense is that you need to keep the pace. It's not only to create at the beginning, but to be able to regenerate this. And in this regeneration process, high rises, because it's identity of this area, have to deal with a very, very high quality, architectural quality. In the history of La Défense, the development, the redevelopment after each crisis has been driven by very, very identity buildings. Grande Arche de la Défense that you see upstairs is probably one of the most interesting example of this past regeneration of the city. And today, we still try to keep the pace with some very high quality architecture buildings. However, each one of these, let's say, secondary buildings will not have such an heritage capacity, and that's not the issue. If you make only heritage buildings together, I don't think the urbanism that will raise from that will be a quality one. Well, now we are in the Greater Paris. And in the Greater Paris, La Défense is a key masterpiece. And I will illustrate this with two elements. First element, the need for new iconic drivers. We are ending a crisis. We are, in an urban point of view, ending it with a new icon. The Hermitage Plaza building that you see, that is a Russian investment, very interesting designed by Sir Norman Foster. This we already know that here we have an heritage building, even before it is built. And I've put in the down on the picture an area where we are working. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too early to present the building that will be there, because the competition is running, and we'll design the laureate next week. But already we have two Pritzker Prize that are facing each other to create new landmarks in areas that are very complicated to regenerate. Here you have also one of the dimensions of La Défense, is that we are working this area as a museum of the modern architecture of late 20th century and early 21st century. But the second example that I want to take is very interesting because it relates to the way the city is designed. Today, with the Greater Paris, we are working toward developing new areas that are suburbs. Well, if you want to give identity to such areas, the elements that have made the success of La Défense are very interesting. And it's interesting to see that one of the first ideas to develop a sector here is Le Bourget area in the north of Paris, a typical suburb of Paris, is to structure the urban paysage around high rises that will have the capacity to be real landscapes and structure the city. Well, just as a conclusion, I put here a few words on give power to the architects. I will add perhaps a little point, not only to the architects, but also to the urbanists. Because if you want to have on a city development perspective, something that reach high duration, you need three things, in fact. First, you have the need of a comprehensive public development authority, regulator, able to face the long time issue. That's probably the most difficult to have. Secondly, you have the need to have the best architects and to accept to give privilege to best architecture in front of other considerations, especially economical ones. Last, you have also a need to have a very, very good network of technical people that are able to build everything. Be clear, the Hermitage Tower, Carpe Diem Tower that was there, will not exist without a very strong know-how, technical know-how, that is driven by the creation of the architects, but also that is made possible by all the technical advisors that are around such projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Excellent. Thank you. Well, my thanks to my three panelists for getting us off to, I think, an excellent start. And as I said at the beginning of my introductory words, the aim is to make this as interactive as possible. It's your session more than ours, and I hope you get as much out of it as possible. We have about an hour for questions, which is quite a long time, and a panel debate on those. And while you're sort of warming up and thinking of some questions, I'm going to ask one or two to the panel to sort of get things going. And I'd like to sort of start with quality, which I touched on in my introductory words as a sort of precursor to heritage, because I think something has to have quality before we can make some kind of heritage assessment. But I'd like you to try and distill in not too many words, what do you think are the characteristics that really make a good tall building? How can this somehow be defined? How can we sort of distinguish between the good and the bad, in general terms, if you like? But Talal, perhaps you could kind of kick off with your thoughts on this.
In my own opinion, having to define what defines a good tall building is really a very difficult question again. I think it can be relative to the area in which it is being built. If it can solve that particular issue or particular land problem or location, I think it would be a great building within that location. Some buildings are, I mean, otherwise you're going to have to talk about efficiency, you talk about safety, you're going to talk about cost, economic side of the equation. But my personal opinion is a building, be it tall or otherwise, must solve the issues related to that particular location where it's built at.
Okay. Thank you. Bill?
Well, you know, a tall building, particularly a great tall building, is a combination of art and science. You know, it is where you make something that is useful, and you know, and maybe it's not the highest efficiency, but it's, you know, it's enough to be, you know, it has first of all be an economic investment, so that they do get built and they are successful and they encourage the next one. But it's that special spark that the design team brings to it, you know, that understands how to relate to it at the street level, and for the people inside the building, people outside the building, people who see it on the skyline. And it's And that's rare. Talent is rare, okay? People who can actually connect the dots and make it happen. As we look around the world, there's a tremendous number of really bad tall buildings out there. Many, 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 many more bad tall buildings than good ones. And so I think it's that last part, you know, the science plus the art that is a very elusive and rare thing that we need more of.
Thank you. Stefan, your thoughts on
In
that?
2 words, context, that relates exactly to what Tara pointed out, and simplicity, the design. You have to have an image that lasts, that is not only in the mood to take back.
I think that's actually quite fun. My introductory words, I put a picture up of the Seagram building, which is my favourite and many's favourite. I know, and it is an extraordinarily simple structure. I mean, when you look at it, it's amazingly beautiful and wonderful inside, but it's very simple. There's not a lot going on.
Well, it's, you know, for me, a building has a chance to become an icon if a third grader can draw it. Okay. You know, you might say that actually John Hancock's more the symbol of Chicago than the Sears or Willis. Okay. Because if you try to draw the Willis, it's, you know, it's got those setbacks. It's hard to do. But you know, any kid can draw a little kind of trapezoidal thing with a couple things coming to the top and a couple X's, and it'll be totally incorrectly done, but you'll know it immediately. And so I think, you know, it's this kind of, you know, this simple clarity of image, you know, that does go a long way for making something that truly becomes the identity of something.
Of course, Tana, please do.
I think William had pointed out that what makes a great building is a combination of art and science. Then, in your views, a bad building.
Yeah.
What is the definition of a bad building? Is it bad science and bad?
Mostly bad art. I think, you know.
So you eliminated one of the two, right?
No, because you know you know, because usually the buildings do work, you know, at a certain level, and quite frankly, some of the bad buildings may be nice on the inside. You know, you may have good useful space and, you know, and amenities and stuff like that, but they detract from the cityscape, and so I think it comes down to the art. Yeah.
There's a lot in that, and something that's unsympathetic. I put an image up in my introduction for buildings just taken from the web, and you know, most, if not all of them, look completely bonkers to me. But it's you know, it's somehow it's sort of instinctive. You sort of know that something just doesn't feel right. It doesn't look right. It's not sympathetic to its environment or whatever it may be. But this is not exact science, of course. It's shades of grey. But you know, I think there is something. I think there is something there. Well, thank you all very much. As I say, this is meant to be interactive, so the floor is yours. We are now open for questions. For the first person who would like to ask a question, if you could put your hand up. My apologies if I don't recognise you. We know each other, but if somebody would like to ask a question, and we will get things going from the floor. So we've got now to, yes, at the back. If you could go to the microphone at the front, please, madam, and if you could tell us who you are, that'd be very helpful.
Yes, I'm Lois Len. I'm an architect and an academic in Paris. I was just wondering about what you just said, if there is no difference between iconic and heritage. Maybe there is something that we could clarify here.
Thank you. Good question. Difference between iconic and heritage. That's interesting. We were talking before the session began about the Gherkin very close to here, Foster's building, or Foster and Partners building, and how that became instantly iconic, a symbol of London. But is it heritage? So Stefan, why don't you perhaps could kick off on this one generally?
That's a good and very difficult question, I think. What I would say is the difference between iconic and heritage, it's time. Iconic buildings can be iconic because they answer to some moods, to some needs of a certain time. One of the really issue, and you pointed out, Richard, just in your introduction, is what the time will make with such points. And perhaps to add one point, there is also something that is going to controversy. The Eiffel Tower that we have seen has been very, very controversial at the time of its building, but also after. Now time has passed. And I have the intuition that an iconic building that would be introduced too easily has a lot of chance to not become an heritage. There is something, there is a need of a conflict somehow in order to take the best from a design, from an urban insertion also, and to put it in the history of a city, of an area.
I would like to continue on the same ground and within Paris. I wonder if you build the tallest building in the world in Paris, will it ever replace the Eiffel Tower? That's number question. The question, the first question. Second thing is, maybe you would see Eiffel Tower and you say this is Paris. You see the tallest tower in the world and you say that is in Paris. You know, I believe once an iconic building becomes a part of the heritage, you can never replace it. Yeah. I mean, no matter what you do. No matter what they do in Egypt, it's the pyramids. So I think it is a very sensitive question and an important one to look at.
I think that's just before you come in, Bill, I think that's a very, very good point you've made. And Bill, of course, you put up the image of the Empire State as part of your presentation. That is New York, and that is the image. The image wasn't of the then tallest buildings, the Twin Towers. That wasn't what people thought of as New York. It was the Empire State, the Chrysler maybe as well, but very much those two, or even maybe the Rockefeller Center, much more sort of potent images of the city. So your thoughts on that, Bill?
You know, the whole thing about, it is interesting, you know, the whole thing about which ones do become. It's not necessarily, certainly height is not the only criteria, because it's, you know, a lot of times they don't become the dominant image, you know, they just become one of the others. But the question about heritage versus icon, you know, which is an important thing, and they are very different. And this whole desire for iconic structures is very dangerous. I mean, it's when people go out to create icons, you know, you know, and it was said earlier in the conference, you know, you can't create an icon it becomes an icon when people accept it as that, you know. But people who are trying to make something that will become iconic is for me very dangerous. It's like you know, when every building says shouts, look at me. You know, and then there's a bunch of them, you don't see any of them. It's like when you're trying to have a conversation in a crowded restaurant and everyone's shouting and you can hear no one, you know, because and I see this so much in some of these emerging cities particularly in China. You know, there's a lot of buildings saying, screaming, look at me, and you see none of them. And so I think that, you know, there's nothing wrong with a good background building, you know, to set off the important buildings, and so I think, you know, that's something from a regulatory point of view is like, you know, and I worry a little bit about you know, here in London, you know, it's you know, you have a tremendous number of really, really good buildings, and they're just right next to each other. You know, it's like, you know, I wonder if they're diminishing each other a little bit. You know.
I think there's an awful lot there. Right, another question from the floor. Yes, sir. There's a microphone coming towards you.
Yes, it's Mark Garland from Toronto. I see it around the world, like Canary Wharf here, the new area in Shanghai, and Stefan now is doing a new neighborhood in Paris, it sounds. And some of these new neighborhoods end up being quite sterile. And the buildings are like trophies on a bookshelf. And what advice does the panel have for, actually I'm privileged to get to participate in a new neighborhood in Toronto. And the developer wants an icon, but you don't just start with the 50-story building. How should he start?
Talal, perhaps you could kick off on this. How should he start?
Well, I think the most important factor in making these buildings sustainable and going forward is to make them economical. And I don't know how economical it is to choose a location inside the city and build another one, like William was saying. There's too many of them at the same location. I think the most important is to add value to those who have the guts to go that far. And therefore, you have to reward them with returns. And basically, I think the best motivator in the world is profits. And otherwise, I mean, unless if it's a government-led project, I think it should be a profitable period. You don't go for glory here, you know, bottom line.
Thank you, Bill.
I think I'll turn to Stefan because it sounds more like an urban planning issue.
Stefan, perhaps.
Well, if I take the example of La Défense, it has made about, let's say, 40 years in order to have real life in this area. So, first time. And work cannot be too rapid. In fact, in La Défense, if you look at the very point that totally changed the perception of the area for the Parisians, is a very recent one. It's in 2007, 6 years ago, when the supermarkets were open on Sunday. Small thing, but instantaneously, Parisians came to La Défense in order to enter this area not on a working day. And that's as made. But if I take from a perspective that is on new areas, new suburbs, new neighborhoods, just before reaching La Défense, I worked on the Grand Paris project. And I remember the way we have decided the location of the stations. This way was not at all scientific. The main criteria that we have chosen is to see if in the local actors there was sufficient, not consensus, because it's not a consensus issue, but sufficient energy to hold a powerful project for their city. And when I speak about actors, there are mayors, there are economic actors, artists even. But to find a tissue that will give more than only urbanism, only buildings, but that will give some life, some dynamism in this area. But that's first very tricky because people change. And secondly, is really a matter of chance. You have to find the good ones and say, well, I don't know what the future will be, but let's try.
I think it's interesting. I mean, this is the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. You know, it's in the title of this thing. And the tall building itself is, you know, it's lost if it's not in a part of a context. And I thought what Peter Risa said the other day about you have to have a place to work, but also a place to party. You know, their proximity. There's a reason to be there and hold it together. And I think a lot of times that does get lost. And I see it. And later, sometimes it seems like the planners or the developer realizes late in the game that they created a dead space. And you see them trying to come back in there and then get the restaurants and the things which make it give it more life or a reason to be there other than just going to work. And so you know, I think this is very important. It'd be very interesting to see. There's all these new cities being created in China. A lot of times they're on a scale which is not very friendly to people. And are they going to be able to have the street culture and the street life that'll make them not dead places, but places you want to go and be at, and make the place a real place and not a sterile place. but it is a big deal.
It is, and I think it's always important to remember that these things are seldom a sort of steady trajectory. I mean, the example here, we are in London, Canary Wharf, you mentioned, so E14, 4 miles from where we're sitting today, is an impressive piece of real estate development in 2013. It was not a smooth journey to get to that path. The docking industry collapsed in this city in the centre in the 1970s. The place was derelict. Margaret Thatcher's government was determined to make something happen, sort of swept away planning controls, and there was this great tower, 1 Canada Square, that was built, and there was nothing else around. I remember going into it when it was completely empty, and we had the Docklands Light Railway. There was no Jubilee line, and then of course they all went bust. I mean, people forget, Olympia in York was the most spectacular of all the property insolvencies in the late 80s, early 90s here. The property remains, but the company went bust and came back in a reincarnation. So you get this sort of reinvention, and then it suddenly sort of takes off. But in the British way, perhaps it was piecemeal. It was not sort of planned in a terribly ordered, coherent way, and not least with the transport connections, for which we have a reputation as being not perhaps the world's leading player, it might be fair to say. It always amuses me. We must be the only country in the world that sort of likes to build airports and then thinks about how people might get there by train many years afterwards. But there we are. Right, another question from the floor. Yes, sir, if you could go to the microphone in the back there, please.
Hi, Anthony Wood at CTBUH. I think a lot of the past few days, for obvious reasons, has focused on London, developments in London, and clearly this panel's about an international perspective. I think in London, I come from England myself, I think we tend to feel that we have a monopoly on this kind of controversy between tall buildings and heritage, because almost every project is so controversial. But actually, I remember, Bill, arriving in Chicago 7 years ago when the Chicago Spire had recently been announced, and that was highly controversial in Chicago, which is the birthplace of tall buildings. And one of the most ridiculous things that I heard in connection with the Chicago Spire was how it would adversely impact the 1922 Wrigley Building and other, more historic tall buildings which are just a couple of blocks from there. And I guess I'm wondering, is this a human condition, kind of an adverse reaction to the unknown? We talked already about the gherkin and how that's already becoming heritage. But in particular, I'd like to ask Talal a question, and I hope you're comfortable answering this. And if not, then I'll think of another question. But one of the strange things for me in the past couple of years has been the completion of the Mecca Clock Tower project, which is the second tallest building in the world, and yet almost, most super tall buildings come with a certain amount of ego and a certain amount of they're primarily driven by attention, and yet the Mecca Clock Tower project is shrouded in complete secrecy. To us in Chicago anyway, nobody kind of knows a lot about it, and I wonder why that is. Why is that? And is it because it's been controversial, as I believe it has been in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I'm really not that knowledgeable about the total project, but I definitely know they had a lot of complications, and parts of the building, it houses, first of all, one of the largest Fairmont hotels and Swiss hotel and 3-4 hotels within that building. And then comes the clock, which they had a lot of issues designing the mechanism of the clock. And I think it's just something that evolved over time. I mean, the evolution of the final whole scene was not seen at the time of design at the beginning. Of course, this is very highly political project that was the reviewer was the king of Saudi Arabia himself. So basically, if he says change this or change that, who would say no to a king? I wouldn't.
Sounds like a good answer. Thank you for that, Anthony. My apologies for not recognizing you, which is a shame on me, which I'm very short-sighted and the lights are bright, so that's my excuse, but my apologies Anyway, we'll come back to you for supplementary questions, I know. Yes, madam, would you like to go to the microphone at the front, please?
Hello, my name is Nora Gabara from the University of Nottingham. Yeah, my question is following Mr. Wood's question about the location and and how tall building affects the location of it. So, Mr. Talal, you said that one of the most reason that make tall buildings successful is that it solves the problem of its location. May I ask you, what would the tallest tower in the world solve the problems in Jeddah? I'm a resident from there, and I can't see the answer to that. Thank you.
Very good question, if I may so say. Right, Talal.
Well, actually, when I answer the question, what makes a great building is it has to address the surroundings of that building. But in our case, we are a developer, and everybody that has huge amount of lands do two things. First, they have to build a magnet to divert traffic and attention to that area. And number two, as you know, if you've lived in Jeddah, Jeddah is a poorly planned city. It's one of the poorest planned cities in Saudi Arabia, and surprisingly so, though it has the most visitors from around the world, about 25 million people that comes for a reason or another, mainly religious reasons. The second point that I was making, we own above 5 million square meters of land in what's supposedly going to be the center of the new Jeddah, because the old Jeddah they can't do much about. There's a lot of issues as it relates to the planning, the transportation, the utilities, the infrastructure. It's just a huge problem to the government and to the people of Jeddah. Once we start fresh, and by the way, having to thank you for the question. Now I'm getting myself together now. You know what is important about our building is it's not because it's tall and it's going to be 1,000 plus and the like. It takes into account a lot of environmental issues. It's setting new standards to the building standards of Saudi Arabia, especially Jeddah. It will use tri-generation of power and the like. It will save about 60% of the power consumed for air conditioning in a very hot city, a country to be also exact. It is the material being designed and developed for such as quite an environment-friendly type of materials. When we started in Riyadh building our own 304 building, Kingdom Center there, the standard of building was so poor, the best of office space standard would be not even an F. I'm not gonna go through the C. I mean, it was so lousy. Today, people, after we built another building of Al Faisaliya did, everything is built to high standards. King Abdullah Financial District, from which SOM is a part, they can testify to the quality being raised just by someone having the guts to spend the money and go up. Now, going up is, like I said, it's just something that attracts the attention of people, and when people come in to that magnet, they see the standards change and they follow. So I hope I answered your question. But for sure, not every building is going to solve that district or that area or that location, but I was answering a different question. So, and I can switch if I like, can't I? Thank you.
Thank you. Right, lots of questions coming. Right at the back. Yes, sir, you've got your hand up. Yep, if you could go to the microphone coming to you. Thank you.
Yes, Marwan Al-Kouli, Versailles School of Architecture. My question is to Mr. Philippe Ray. It's about La Défense. We are talking in the conference about high-end heritage. And I wonder if you consider that here in Europe we could always produce a heritage model that corresponds to occupants and tenants' requirements in terms of needs. It's not about, because here in Europe we are seeing foreign societies and big companies in architecture and engineering. It's about commercial and rentable square meters. So do you think that you are coming from Paris and here in London, there is another experience to talk about an identity, a tower identity in the city. Do you think that in Paris we could produce another model that that it's not addressed to high, but to heritage and to an European model? Thank you.
Stefan.
Well, to try to answer your question, I will start first with the Eiffel Tower. If you look at the Eiffel Tower in terms of tenants or occupants, it's awful. In fact, it's an only heritage building. And in fact, it has been made not as heritage building at that time, because it was a temporary building, but as an icon to show the know-how of France during a world exposition. And that's very interesting to see how this today lasts and gives this identity. On the recent experience, you're right that there is a very huge tension between all the economic reality of the buildings in general. In fact, it's not only an issue on tall buildings, but of course on tall buildings it becomes very pregnant. On the economics of the project and on the power that is given to the owner of the building and to its occupants that will make the rentability on one side, and on the way this project is designed, both on an aesthetical point of view, but also, which is almost as important, on its capacity to be totally inserted in the urban tissue. When I saw what we are doing in La Défense, for example, but I know there are other examples in Paris, but not only, we try to keep a certain balance between these objectives. Meaning we are ready as a land tenant, because we want our power in La Défense. We are not only a public authority, but we are also the owner of the land, which gives some power, very pragmatic power. We are ready to sell for free some additional square meters to make the economic balance of project, if these additional square meters enable to have better architectural and urban quality. Even I would say this is our main mission, because our main mission is to keep an area living and regenerating by itself. However, I can say that it's a very, very tough job. And we see in the relation between the investors and their architects when they came to us. Most of the time, it's the investor that speaks. And at the end, that's normal because it's the one who pay. Mm-hmm. Our job is to help the architects say also something, add something that will give real life to the project on a long-term issue. And here we can balance by the economics. In the areas where such a regulator like us does not exist, I truly believe that it's very, very difficult to keep this balance, because it will never be the external regulation that we create that will help this balance. It's very, very difficult to say in a law what is beautiful or not. It does not work. Therefore, that's always a matter of discussion. And perhaps just to add one point that can help, however, is the way the public is involved in the debate around the projects. Something that is very particular to the tall buildings is that they raise important public debates, controversial or not. When we try to make the citizens that live and inhabitants of the area discuss about the way they use all the public space, first of all, can raise some very interesting things that have an influence on the project design. However, I don't know a very lot good experiences about that, to be frank. La Défense in 2007, when former President Nicolas Sarkozy launched the renewal plan of La Défense, citizens learned about in the newspapers. It was awful. We had made about 5 years to take over this this first very bad reaction of the public. There's a need to have a quality in the debate that is very, very important to have such an influence. And quality needs confidence, and confidence needs time. And people that are able to promise, which is not so much the case usually.
I think that's very fair. And I mean, they are structures that generate strong views. I mean, very much the case here in London, the Shard recently completed, very controversial when it was going through the planning process, and all kinds of heated debates in this city about whether it was appropriate, whether it was too big, and so on and so forth, and some compromising on the design and so on. And people do, and people who perhaps ordinarily may not have particularly strong views about buildings more generally seem to get quite animated when a tall building is being proposed in their environment, on their doorstep. They feel strongly about it. So we have more time. So some more questions from the floor. Yes, sir. There's a microphone right next to you.
An architect from India. My question is a little sad, and it's addressed to Stefan, William, and Talal. That you all come from different parts of the world. Is the local heritage now endangered to be extinct? Because when we talk of Stefan creating New York in Manhattan in La Défense and the market-driven, technology-driven glass buildings, I mean, will we lose the local heritage brand, or we'll just have a universal global brand, like selling McDonald's burgers all over the world with little variations in that burger? Because I feel really sad, and because it's market and technology driven, so there's very less, and also the developer driven. So very less the designers. What happens if you put? I question William. If you put Sears Towers in Dubai or Sears Towers in La Défense, because how can we protect the local brand? That's my and take it away from that global branding. And the lady said you can make a tall building anywhere. You design it anywhere, put it anywhere. So what is how we as architects preserve and make an impact of a local? I think we can put the Shard building anywhere. It will look nice. We'll put the Gherkin building anywhere. It will look nice. Any good building will look nice anywhere. So.
It's a very good question, if I may say so, and I'll come to Bill first on this in a second. But I thought the Manhattan comparison was very interesting. As Stefan said, of course, a bit of Manhattan in La Défense, and you could sort of see that a bit in Canary Wharf as well, where U.S. architects were used in many cases, and it does look quite American in my view, much of it. So. Bill, perhaps you could kick off on this. Are we kind of losing something in this? Where you go in the world, you might not know where you are.
Why did cities or different parts of the world look different to start with? Okay, different climates was a big part of it. They also different construction technology and different I call it ethical standards or value systems. What is it they value within their culture? There's some cultures who value simplicity. There's others who value complexity. Okay, And so if you go to India and you look at a temple there, it's very, very complex. You go to a Protestant church in northern Europe, very simple. Okay, and it's not one's better or right or wrong. It's just that the different value system. What they like. So now we come to the present age. Okay, the technology of tall buildings is universal. Okay, so the use of local materials you're doing something in the Middle East and it's a reddish clay because that's what was available. Okay, now all of our stuff is premise to lease or Gartner or whoever, it's coming from around the world. All the construction technology is universal. Now the thing that and then the whole thing about these tall buildings became climatized, so they became divorced from their environment, because it's all air conditioned and heated, and you're just trying to keep the environment out. I see with the move towards sustainability that perhaps we'll get more climatically driven. Where no more, hopefully fewer reflective glass. Towers that are totally reflecting all the thing, and more buildings that do respond much more to their locale, to the climate what they're in, which I think will help to make them more unique to their location. But this is a very it's a very difficult thing because you're right. You see buildings that could be anywhere, everywhere, and that's something that I don't think any of us want. I think the homogenization of the world is very terrible. So,
Talal, would you like to come in on this one?
Yeah, sure. Personally, I really sympathize with architects. I mean, I'm not one, so they believe they are the owners of what they create, right? Actually, the owners are the people that pay for it, and the whole idea, bottom line here, is that there's going to be always a war between the two. I mean, who owns this building? I'm proud of it because I built it. You're proud of it because you've designed it. How this affects the cultural side of it, that's a very hard question for me. But in my opinion, I like to address the tall buildings part. Just like Howard Hughes, at one stage, built the Hercules, the plane. And everybody thought he was nuts. Maybe he was, God bless his soul. But it hadn't been him, you would not see the Airbus 380. So there is an evolution in everything. We do something, somebody comes and grabs that technology and drives it further. And that's jobs. That's progress. That's I look at tall building from a whole different perspective. And I think cultures can be preserved through our own selves versus buildings. I mean, at the end of the day, a building is a building. And I would have to say it is a universal thing more than anything else. So I hope.
We're talking about bad buildings. A lot of the bad buildings are there when someone tries to take something that was developed at a residential scale and applies it to a skyscraper. I mean, it's, and I understand, I appreciate the effort, but, sometimes it's got to be something different, just, it can't be a house rendered large.
Thank you, Stefan. I mean, when your, forebears, the Parisian authorities were sort of developing La Défense all those years ago, do you think harder it is to imagine how it could be done? Should they have tried to do something that was more obviously French than what has manifested itself in this, in this extension to Paris, this sort of little mini Manhattan there? Should they have tried, or does it not really matter that much?
To be frank, I think La Défense is very French. Now, I will give just an example. La Défense has been built on an idea that was from the Charte d'Athènes, that was to separate the pedestrian area and the circulation. Well, the idea existed and was somehow universal. However, what is very specific in the way La Défense has handled this issue is to be able to invest a colossal amount of money in creating a public structure that is totally non-economically efficient for free, just because the idea was there. That's a little bit French, I must say, in the concept at least. However, you're right, the objects that are in La Défense, some of them have a French touch. However, they have something universal. Something and something not. Because if we look closely at most, not all, but most of the objects in La Défense, they are in fact adapted not to a culture, but to a context, to a urban context. If you take La Grande Arche, for example, this is typically an object that has been put in a context that comes from history. In fact, we continue the major axis that began from the Tuileries, where the kings of France were staying, and toward Concorde, toward Champs-Élysées, Arc de Triomphe, La Défense, and after Château de Saint-Germain. So there is this issue of context that keep the things. However, in the question that you pointed out, there is something that is very difficult to handle, and that deals to what I would call optimization. In fact, when you are building something, whatever, today you build it with a strong influence of the economics that are beside. It has to give rentability, it has to cost not too much, it has to last, and so on, which is very pragmatic and, if you take this to the extreme, there is a big risk of standardizing all the objects. Not exactly everything. You can change the color of the glasses and so on, but at some extent there is this risk. And I foresee this risk not only in the globalization that you point out, but also in another effect that we see, what I would call the greenery word. The fact that wanting to have sustainability at the top level of our priorities, we can have the risk of having only optimized objects put one near the other. Well, if I want to be frank, I think the tall buildings are something that gives some hope. Precisely because when you build a tall building, the only thing you do not want to do is have exactly the same building that your neighbor. When you make a seven-story building in the middle of a suburb, well, the temptation is a little bit more important. So I don't fully answer to your question on the culture, because I don't know how to answer, to be frank. But it's true that this optimization and technical risk exist, and we have to face it, because else we have cities that will lose some quality of life, that their identity, in fact.
Thank you. Yes, sir. There's a microphone next to you.
Just a quick point, really. I think from a Western perspective, the redevelopment of all these places are ex-industrial spaces, and it's a redevelopment of wasteland. Whereas, I guess in the Middle East, it's the destruction of existing communities where these places will... bit off-putting. You know, it's a demolition of a district or something where people have lived for maybe hundreds of years, and I think that's the difference that perhaps people have got different perspectives on.
Yes, it's an interesting take. I suppose it depends where it is. Certainly in the context of La Défense and Canary Wharf, you've got that reuse of what was redundant space, which perhaps isn't always the case in other parts of the world. But I think most cities go through a sort of constant process of reinvention. I mean, this one, because it's such an old city and not a planned city, or most of it isn't planned, unlike Paris, which is planned beautifully. This isn't an ordered city. Very few parts of it were set out in any kind of structured way. The rest of it is a sort of hodgepodge, which anyone who sits in a taxi in the city will find out. But no, thank you for that. Another question from the floor. We have about 10 minutes. Yes, sir.
Actually, to my neighbor sitting here, some of these buildings just don't fit anywhere. So I thought the panel should have said Taipei 101, Jinmao Tower. I mean, they're very reflective of the local traditions in that area, as your Kingdom Tower may be too. And then there's some iconic buildings that didn't earn a place on the poster. And why is CTBUH Tower a tall building? And why is that not on the poster?
Crikey.
Anthony.
Yes. Do you want to come on stage, sir? We're not responsible for the posters. We're just, we're just the hired lackeys.
That's very easy to answer. 50 European icons. This is you.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have another question? Yes, sir. There's a microphone on its way to you.
Nigel Biggs, CBRE. My question is just to probe a bit more on the bottom line that you talked about. You rightly said that Canary Wharf went spectacularly bust. I look at some of the other buildings around London that I know well. The Shard, whatever I said this morning, is reluctant to lease up the office space. And even the Gherkin is not achieving premium rents. It's had a spectacular occupancy rate, but it's not getting a premium rate for what is the iconic property. So your building is going to be 1 kilometre and something high, exponential costs. Does the bottom line really work for the buildings we see on the poster and on the other posters we've got as well?
Thank you. Talal.
Well, actually, our building is a little bit different. It's a multi-use building. It's got residential, office space, and it will be anchored by a hotel. The Four Seasons Hotel will operate from there. And we've always said tall buildings don't necessarily make money, but it actually, the spillover of this effect of the building makes you money. So when you own, for example, 1 million square meters of land, you're building on 80,000 square meters the tower. The rest benefits because everybody wants to build, and then you're selling air, actually. You're not airspace more than land. So in our model, at least, it works very well. We've done it before in Riyadh on a smaller scale. And it seems like if I don't make money to the owners, I will lose my bonus. So I assure you, the economics is right, at least as of this moment.
Thank you, Bill.
What was interesting, when I had two tall buildings top out in 2009, the Burj Khalifa and the Trump Tower in Chicago. And they were both basically residential, okay? So the really tall ones, and I think your building has quite a bit of residential. It's like if you're a corporation and you have a company car in the U.S., it's probably a Ford, okay? Your private car might be a BMW or a Porsche because it's your choice, okay? And so it was kind of interesting to me that these two very tall buildings we're working on were both residential. There's so it's that discretionary income, and you got to get the market right and stuff like that. And Burj Khalifa sold out levels 19 to 108 in 2 nights in 2004, and everybody who bought a unit had to put down 50% of the price within 6 months. Okay, and so it also helped finance the construction. Same thing on the Trump Tower. He has this, the Trump organization has this product where you you buy hotel rooms or something. I don't understand all this stuff, but basically they opened the hotel while we were still pumping concrete. The building hadn't topped out. And so we had to work with the fire marshal, the fire department in Chicago to get approval. So they had all the life safety things in place and stuff like that. But the Trump organization, they wanted to be able to close on the buyers, so they're going to get their cash while they're building. Whereas if you do an office building, you build the whole thing and you wait for the rent check to come. Okay, and I'm sure you understand the economics much better than I do on this thing. So it is kind of interesting to me that some of these really tall buildings, which are really in a market economy versus China, is a bit more confusing to me. I'm not sure how much of a market economy, but if you're in most of the world where you're actually trying to make money on your investment and with a reasonable return, it was interesting to me that for some of these they do make money. And then we talked about the Burj effect. Mies, who's the developer on Burj Khalifa, they suddenly, they may have thought of this a little bit, but they were totally surprised about how much money they made on the buildings they were building adjacent to the Burj, because the views were so much more valuable. And the Mies controls one square kilometer. It was an old military base, and with the Burj in the middle, and they own all the parcels around there. We're currently working on a couple of projects for him right now, where the whole criteria is they have to have a view of the Burj, and so they made money, I think, on the tower, but also on the value it created for the rest. Could you imagine if you owned all the views to the Empire State Building? What the value of that would be. So it's.
It does seem to be a curious thing with tall buildings. Of course, it goes back many, many years, but often you sort of see, on this side is sort of rational economic debate and the market forces and all the rest of it. On this side is, a driven individual ego, a star architect, whatever it may be. And you've got this kind of juxtaposition, and sometimes it works well. Of course, famously Rockefeller was told he was mad when he was developing the Rockefeller Center in the 1930s. He had the advantage of being enormously rich, of course, which helped. But and it worked spectacularly. But that isn't necessarily always the case. But kind of internationally, we see this kind of zeitgeist. Everyone wants a tall building. And I made some slightly flippant remarks at the beginning, quoting from Piano, but there's this kind of, I want to have one bigger than that one sort of argument that kind of comes into it. And just as we've got a few minutes, but just kind of wrap up the question from me, if I may, which is sort of a blurred one, but it's on the super tall thing, because the last time I had the privilege of being in this conference was in Dubai, but how tall can we go? I mean, surely there must reach a point where even, the brilliant engineers and architects, it might be possible. Physically, it might be possible to do it. But somebody really has to say, well, client, we can do it. But it's just bonkers, frankly. You can't carry on building forever. I mean, Bill, as a good, how does this argument pan out?
Well, we certainly do a kilometer. We know that.
The mile.
Yeah, in the mile you could do. And it's not necessarily that expensive. It's expensive, but you just have to invent new systems as you go higher, because the paradigm, you have to have a different paradigm. But it can be done. What's interesting is what's the value you're creating, and does that justify it? I once gave a lecture on Frank Lloyd Wright's Mile High Tower. And I was asked by the Skyscraper Museum in New York to give a lecture on it, and so I studied it, and it had like ungodly amount of square footage in it. It was like it was, and so one of the things is, you make a building so big, is it too big? From an area point of view, can you scale it down so it's at a value? And then the other part is just your inner ear. My ears popped when I went to the top of the Gherkin the other day. It was like 40 stories, right? If you have a head cold, can you not go home because your ears won't deal with it? That's part of it. Because say you did do a mile, it's like Denver's the mile high city, right? It's like going from seaside to Denver in your elevator, and so. Is there going to be just a personal comfort problem? I think that'll come down to it more than the engineering or even the economics, perhaps. It may just people may find it's just uncomfortable to do that height elevation. Now, having said that, sometimes you'll ski down a mountain and you'd go through a very large elevation change, but you do it slowly, so you don't notice it so much. So.
And I think there is a sort of common sense thing. I think it may have been you, Bill, in Dubai that made this point, but I think it was the pizza test. It was the, you know, there's the guy, he's in his, you know, he's paid this vast amount of money for his apartment on the whatever floor, and he decides he wants a pizza. And it's, can the guy deliver the pizza up and it's still hot? Because of the complexity of the structure by the time he gets into his very swanky apartment. But Stefan, I mean, just, you know, from a French perspective, I mean, you know, when, you know, how far could this go in a historic city like Paris with its restrictions, of course, but if somebody came along and said, you know, we want something that is just going to dwarf everything else?
Well, in Paris, the answer is quite simple. The limit is about 340 meters because we have the airplanes that are over the city, and we had with the Hermitage Towers the issue because they are just to the top of this level. But well, this is not a real answer. I think the reality is, I don't believe at all that in a city such as Paris, we can enter in a run towards the highest building. In fact, even today, we see that the Eiffel Tower is creating the reference. It's creating an objective reference somehow. You put in your introductory slides about relativity in the dimensions. What tall is relative. And I think in a town like Paris, in fact, history, and this is real heritage, perhaps a cultural one. History has put an objective reference, and nobody will be really able to go over. Each city has its identity, and somehow we have seen here in London that the Shard is creating a new reference. Is it absolute in London or not? I cannot say. Okay. But I think our, let's say, old cities, old European cities, have not the culture toward very high buildings that let me think that there is a chance to enter as a competition.
I think that must be right. Well, one of my tasks, perhaps my primary task, is to get you out on time, and this is England, so we will break for tea in a minute, which is very important to us. Thank you to my panelists.